Simon's mother-in-law tonight. Another woman's story. Jesus is healing Simon's mother-in-law. We're going to be in Luke chapter 4, verse 38. Now, I'm trying to pick out, or my intention is to pick out the stories about women and other Samaritans, outcasts, etc., that are specific to Luke, unique to Luke, that only Luke talked about it. But this is an interesting story, and I wanted to read it. I want to go through it, even if it's quickly. Matthew and Mark also write this account, but not the way Dr. Luke does. So I just want to be in Luke chapter 4, verse 38 with you for a while. Let's read it. It says, "Then he got up and he left the synagogue." We're going to have to define some places, find out who we're talking about, where we are on the map. "Then he got up and left the synagogue and he entered Simon's house. Now Simon's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked him to help her." A lot going on there. When he got up, the he is clearly Jesus Christ. And it says that he got up and left the synagogue and he entered into Simon's house. So the first question we have to ask is, where are they? What city? What synagogue? Whose synagogue? There were many synagogues in the areas in which Jesus ministered. But here we are in Luke chapter 4, verse 31. Look what it says just a few verses before. I put it on the board in case you're not in the book. But in verse 31, this is the context, this is the geography, this is where Jesus is. This is important. In Luke 4:31 it says, "And he came down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee. And he was teaching them on the Sabbath, and they were amazed at his teaching, for his message was with authority." So what city, when you get down to verse 38, he left the synagogue. What synagogue? What city? Capernaum. He's in the city of Capernaum. Capernaum is a city that's right along the Sea of Galilee. I mean, it's a sea town. And this is where Simon lived and his brother Andrew, where John and James were also in the fishing industry in the city of Capernaum. It's a little bitty town. I should have shown you photos because I have them. We were there. Just to show you distance as we go through this, if they're accurate about where Peter's house is, and I think they are, if I were standing in the synagogue in Capernaum, Peter's house would have been right about where the intersection is right here, where County Road 20 and 1459 intersect, right here. It was very close, less than 100 yards away, the synagogue to Peter's house. So we see here, Jesus leaves the synagogue in Capernaum, walks over to Simon. I'm sorry, I'm calling him Peter. I'm jumping the gun. Walks over to Simon's house and realizes that Simon's mother-in-law has a high fever. She's sick. We have to answer the question, though, who is this Simon? Now, you may wonder in a minute, why are you chasing this down so hard? I'll tell you in a minute why we're chasing this down so hard. Who is Simon that Jesus is referring to? If you look at Matthew chapter 4, verse 18, I've got it here on the board. It was an earlier event when Simon was called into ministry by Jesus, the first time they met, and this is what it says about a man named Simon. It says, "Now as Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, 'Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men.'" Not fishers of fish. "We'll go and collect souls. I'll make you fishers of men," believers in Jesus Christ. So Simon is Peter. Simon, if you added an E to that, what name does it make? Simeon. Simeon. It's a Hebrew name. It means to hear or heard. From the Hebrew word Shema. Simon's Hebrew name is Simeon. His Roman name was Peter, Petros, Petros, small rock. So he had a Hebrew name. He had a Greek name, more of a Roman name that he was known as, and that was Peter. So Simon is Peter. But you say, and trust me, some say that the Simon spoken of in Luke chapter 4, verse 38 is not this Simon, not Peter. Look what it says, if you will turn with me, because I just wrote this down. Look at Mark chapter 1, verse 29. Just turn to it really quickly. I want to absolutely know for certain that this man in Capernaum that has invited Jesus into his house, that has a sick mother-in-law, I want to know for certain who this man is, because it matters greatly. Look at what it says in Mark chapter 1, verse 29. I told you Matthew and Mark also wrote about this event. Look what Mark adds in his description of this event. Now, as soon as they had come out of the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew. Look what it says on the board. Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew his brother. Simon and Andrew are brothers. We know that from Matthew chapter 4. We know from Mark chapter 1, verse 29, that the house that they entered belonged to Simon and his brother Andrew. So we know that it was Peter. It was this very Simon that was introduced in Matthew chapter 4, verse 18, who's also called Peter. This is the apostle Peter, the fisherman. This is the house that Jesus went into. And you're still scratching your head saying, okay, I get it. Why is it important? It's not important for our belief as Gulf Coast Bible Church, as dispensational biblicists. It's important for the Catholic belief. Because what does it say? Substitute Simon's name for Peter. Peter, right? Peter. Upon this rock I will build my church. You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. The Catholics take that verse in Matthew 17. No, it's not Matthew 17. It might be. They take that verse to mean that it was on the person Peter that God formed the church. You see the problem with that? It wasn't Peter. It was Jesus Christ, the foundation of the church. But the Catholics say it was Peter. The Catholics say that Peter was the first pope. Now let's go back and see what it says in Luke chapter 4, verse 38. It says, he got up and he left the synagogue and he entered Peter's house, and Peter's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked Jesus to help her. What's the problem with Roman Catholicism, the papacy, all of the clergy in Roman Catholicism? What's the problem with them versus this man, Peter? Let's look at it. What is it? No one in the Catholic clergy is allowed to marry. No one in the Catholic clergy has ever been allowed to marry. Yet the Bible says that this man, Peter, who the Catholic Church thinks is the foundation of their church, what does it say about him? It said he had a mother-in-law. Let's look at the word mother-in-law. We're going to get to the rest of the story, but this is important enough to stop and realize, why did I leave the Catholic Church 35 years ago? Why do we struggle against Catholic heresy still? Because the Bible is so clear on all these things. The word for mother-in-law in the Bible is penthera. Here it is right here, P-E-N-T-H-E-R-A. It's used 6 times in the Bible. 3 times in Matthew, 3 times in Luke, penthera. You know what it's interpreted as every time in the English? Mother-in-law. Mother-in-law. That's what the word means. You can't get around it. You can't reinterpret it. That's what a penthera is in the Greek. It's a mother-in-law. So a couple of points. If Jesus is in Capernaum, where Andrew and his brother Simon, called Peter, live, along the Sea of Galilee, if Jesus is in Capernaum, and he is, we know that to be a fact, and Simon is the same man as Peter, and he is, we know that to be a fact, we chased it down, then this mother-in-law that is spoken of belongs to Peter. This is a real problem. I mean, this is a fundamental, foundational problem for the Church of Rome. Huge problem. Then this mother-in-law belongs to Peter, which means this mother-in-law has a daughter that Peter is married to. Huge problem for Roman Catholicism. Show your favorite Catholic this verse and see how they get out of it. There's no way out of this. There simply is no way out of this. Which means Peter is a married man. Again, no way out. This destroys the Catholic Church's belief that Peter is the first pope, since no clergy member in the Catholic Church is allowed to marry, nor have they ever been allowed to marry. A real problem with the Catholic origin. Big problem. But let's get back to the story. Jesus is in Capernaum. He's entered into Peter's house after a long day. If you read what comes before this, a long day of teaching, a long day of casting out demons in the synagogue. And he's come to Peter's house for refreshment, for rest, for recuperation, for refreshment. He's entered into Peter's house. If he wanted to continue healing, he would have stayed at the synagogue. If he wanted to continue teaching, he would have stayed at the synagogue. He was ready for a rest. So he's come to Peter's house for refreshment. It says again in Luke 4 verse 38, then he got up, Jesus, he left the synagogue, and he entered into Peter's house. Now Peter's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked Jesus to help her. As I said, Mark and Matthew also wrote about this particular event, but only Dr. Luke. Now remember who Luke is now. Luke is a physician. Luke's a doctor. And when it comes to illnesses in the Bible, Luke just naturally is going to be much more interested in a story like this. He wants details. So Dr. Luke is going to describe this event a little differently than the others. The first thing we read that we don't read in Matthew and Mark is that Luke says this is a high fever. Not just a fever, a high fever. See, Dr. Luke does a little more investigating, asks a few questions that Mark wouldn't know to ask and Matthew wouldn't know to ask. A tax collector, Luke knew what questions to ask. Very interesting. So Luke says that this was a high fever, and he also speaks about the stance that Dr. Jesus took with his patient. The stance. Look at what it says in verse 39. And standing over her, he rebuked the fever, and it left her, and she immediately got up and waited on them. And these are exactly the kind of details that Dr. Luke would have found out during his investigation. He would have gone in there, found Peter's mother, and said, I've heard about this miracle. Obviously, I wasn't there. I want to know. Tell me about the fever. Specifics about the fever. When did you get it? How long did you have it? Was it a low-grade fever? Did it make you dizzy? Luke would have asked her all those questions. The man's a physician. And when we get to the scriptures, he says she didn't just have a fever, she had a high fever. We don't know how high, but we know that the woman was ill. She was sick. What else might he have asked? Tell me exactly, when Jesus entered into the room, what did he do? Did he come to you? Did he hold your hand? What was his posture? What was his stance? See, one doctor to another doctor, the great physician Jesus, Dr. Luke wanted to know, how does Jesus treat a patient? And so what does Luke include? That he stood over her. He stood over her. If you read in Matthew and Mark, all they say is he took her hands or he laid hands on her and the fever left her. But Luke got a little deeper into the story and you see the posture of Jesus. You can see a doctor hovering over a patient on a bed, touching her forehead, asking her questions. Dr. Luke, the investigator. Did you have any ill effects? Once the fever broke, what was it like? Did you have any ill effects? Did you remain dizzy? What were the events after this healing? And you say, why do you think Luke asked all those questions? Because Luke would have wanted to know, was this a complete recovery? And if so, this was a miracle. If he gave you some sort of balm, some sort of pill to take, some sort of rub, some sort of leaves on you, gave you something from a plant that he carried with him, then the fever was just healed. But if you stood up from a high fever and immediately were completely healed, then this, friends, is a miracle of the man Jesus. That's what Luke was after. And that's what he got to. That's what he got to, because he says, standing over her, Jesus rebuked the fever and it left her, and she immediately got up, having been immediately and completely healed, and she waited on them. Let's look at a couple of words. Jesus, it says he rebuked the fever. Now, we read this word rebuke often when it talks about him rebuking an unclean spirit, a demon, to come out of someone. So don't make the mistake of thinking this woman, Peter's mother-in-law, had a demon that was causing her fever. That's not what this is. He doesn't mention demon. He doesn't mention possession anywhere in this. The woman was simply sick, and Luke personified the illness, the fever, by saying that Jesus spoke to the fever. What does this word mean? Epitimao in the Greek, it means to warn forcefully with strong disapproval. To warn forcefully with strong disapproval. An interesting take. Jesus made it verbal. I don't know why he chose to do that, but Jesus made it verbal so people like Dr. Luke could come and understand. He didn't only touch her, the man said words. Jesus said words. He vocally told this fever to leave this woman. He warned the fever, and the fever left. And look what it says after that. After the fever left her, it says she immediately got up and waited on them. A great word in the Greek, diakoneo. And some of you in the church called deacons. This is where you get your title from. From the Greek word diakoneo. What does it mean? It means to serve. But it also means to help to some food. A deacon in the Greek, in the Roman world, was a table server, a waiter, a waitress, a waiter. That's what the deacon was. Someone who helped someone to food or to help with food or drink. Now remember what I told you when we started. Jesus had been in the synagogue. He had been teaching all day. He'd been casting demons out of people. He went to Peter's house for some refreshment, some rest. And Peter's mother was unable to help with that because she had a high fever. Jesus takes the fever from her miraculously. Immediately the woman gets up and starts to serve Jesus and Simon and Andrew and whoever else was in the house, James and John, I think the book of Mark says. So she got up and she started helping them to some food. She served them, which is interesting. Usually when Jesus does miracles, he does miracles in the sense of or with the aim at a salvific event. He heals people from somebody. He raises people from the dead, and you often read that as a result of that, many came to believe in Jesus because of what they saw. Or the person that he healed believed in Jesus. A woman, your faith has made you well. Things like that. But in this situation, Luke writes about this, Jesus simply healed this woman because she was ill, and because she was in discomfort. And he just wanted to heal her because he's a compassionate God. There's no mention anywhere, and I'm going to make the assumption that Peter's mother had most likely already believed that Jesus was the Messiah. That Peter and her son Andrew had made an argument to their mother, this is why we're leaving our fishing business. This is why we're following this man, Mother. It's because this man is the Son of God. He's the Christ, the Son of the living God, as Peter later told Jesus in John chapter 11. I don't think Peter's mother-in-law was an unbeliever here. Jesus is simply a compassionate man and a compassionate God. There's no mention of him doing this miracle so that she would know that he was God and come to believe in her. Jesus simply healed her. because she was in pain and discomfort and he wanted her to feel better. He's a compassionate man. He didn't do this to save her soul like he did many of the other miracles that he did. This is simple compassion. This is just love for a fellow human being. He wanted her well. It is said, and I don't know because I've never read a primary source on this. I've read others who make this statement, so I'll make it, but I'm not going to die on this hill. But it is said that the Greek society, held women in higher esteem than the Romans, even than the Jews. And so Luke, being the writer that was writing primarily to the Greek audience here, took a focus on women to show that Jesus also honored women. Interesting. Like I said, I don't know if that's a fact or not. But it is said by many that the Greeks held women in higher esteem than the other societies, than the other cultures, than the Romans and the Jews. And Luke focused on women and Jesus' compassion for women to show his Greek audience that Jesus also honors women. And it says, as we keep on going here, that he kept on healing people that night. Look what it says in verse 40. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about this. Start thinking through this verse. While the sun was setting, you read verses like this and you read little clauses like that and you say, what difference does that make? While the sun was setting. Who cares? I care. Every jot and tittle. There's no mistake in the Scripture. All Scripture is God-breathed and profitable. What does it mean? Why did he add that clause? While the sun was setting, all those who had any who were sick with various diseases brought them to Jesus in Capernaum, in Peter's house, and laying his hands on each of them, he was healing them. Why would Jesus be healing people in Capernaum after sundown? Because it was the Sabbath? What day was it? Look back at what it says in the first verse that we went over. In Luke chapter 4, verse 31, he came down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and he was teaching them on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. Now let me ask you a couple of questions. Maybe you know, maybe you don't. What time? What time does the Jewish day begin? Our day begins at 12 midnight and it ends at 11:59 p.m. and it starts again at 12 midnight. The 12:01 a.m. is the beginning of the next day, right? Our day goes from midnight to midnight. What hour does the Jew use as the first day or the first hour of the next day? What? 6 p.m. A Jewish day goes from 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. The Sabbath begins on Friday at 6 p.m. and ends, and according to our calendar, and ends on Saturday at 6 p.m. Now why, let me ask you then again, why are the people waiting until after sundown to come to Jesus? Because they're good Jews observing the Sabbath. They're observing the Sabbath. You don't do any work on the Sabbath. You don't travel on the Sabbath. They wouldn't go to get healed on the Sabbath. They're waiting until the sun goes down, until after 6 p.m. for Shabbat, for the Sabbath day to end. And that's why that little bitty phrase, while the sun was setting, has everything to do with Jewish culture. These are Jews. Remember where we are. We're in Capernaum along the Sea of Galilee in northern Israel. This is Israel. These are Jews. And the Jews that want to be healed by Jesus certainly wouldn't go to Jesus during the Sabbath observance. They would wait until after the Sabbath was finished at 6 p.m. on Saturday night. So that's what they did. And while the sun was setting, all those who had any sickness and various diseases were brought to him, and he laid his hands on each of them, and he was healing them. I told you it was going to be a short night. We're almost done. I have to ask you a question before we end. Did Jesus do wrong by healing on the Sabbath? The question has to be asked, wait a minute. If the Jews in Capernaum were waiting until the end of the Sabbath to come to Jesus, maybe Jesus should have waited until the end of the Sabbath also. Maybe he shouldn't have healed the man in the synagogue. Maybe he shouldn't have cast out that demon in the synagogue. He was working on the Sabbath. And the law says you're not to do any work on the Sabbath. So we've gone over this recently. I hope you're not tripped up by the question. The question is, did Jesus of Nazareth do wrong by healing on the Sabbath? The answer is no, he didn't. Look what it says in Matthew chapter 12, our last verse here. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 10 through 12, another story about Jesus and healing on the Sabbath. Look what he says. A man was there whose hand was withered. And they questioned Jesus, asking, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So that they might accuse him. They were trying to trap him. They wanted him to heal this man with the withered hand on the Sabbath so they could point the finger legalistically at Jesus and say, see, he broke the Mosaic law. He's not who you say he is. Messiah would never break the Mosaic law. He's a fraud. They're trying to trap him. So they bring him a man, or a man was there withered. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? They wanted to accuse him, and this was Jesus' answer. He's always asking questions, this Jesus. He says, what man is there among you who has a sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, he'll not take hold of it and lift it out? The answer would be none of us. We wouldn't just let a sheep die that fell into a pit, even on the Sabbath day. We would go get it. And Jesus knew that. Will he not take hold of it and lift it out? So Jesus makes the next statement, how much more valuable then is a man, this man with the withered hand, than a sheep that you would save on the Sabbath? You call that hypocrisy. He just called them hypocrites. He called them on their own illogic here. How much more value then is a man than a sheep? So then, Jesus concludes, it is lawful. It is within the law of Moses, the Mosaic law. It is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. What I'm meaning to say is that if they would have brought these people before the sun was setting, it would have been okay. If they were ill, Jesus would have done good and healed the people on the Sabbath day, even before the sundown. But the good Jews wanted to wait until the Sabbath was over. Very interesting. Next time we're going to go to Jesus and the widow of Nain, and probably see another one, not just her. That's a short account. 7:01, that's a record. It's almost like there's a football game on. Doesn't have anything to do with football. Just wanted to go early. Let's close. Father,